These new GPUs could spell serious trouble for Nvidia, and a bizarre RTX 4000 leak was just posted online. Let's talk. Talking about RTX 4000, let's go ahead and move on to that second story where some really bizarre information about an RTX 4000 GPU was actually recently leaked. Now, there has been some previous information about what I believe is the RTX 4080 Ti or 4090 that has been leaked. And the last pieces of information that we got, it was going to be codenamed Lovelace. He's going to be supposedly fabricated on a 5nm node. It's likely going to be Samsung 5nm, at least that's what I believe. And according to a video cards article based off of a post of a 3tcenter.org and Cop87Kimi Twitter post, it looks like they estimated they would have 12 graphics processing clusters, 72 texture processing clusters, 144 streaming multiprocessors, 18,432 CUDA cores, which is actually over 70% more than the current RTX 3090. So yeah, this GPU is going to be really, really fast. Apparently, it could have up to 66.4 teraflops of FP32 performance if it's clocked at, say, 1.8 gigahertz. However, we don't know what the clock speeds of this GPU are going to be at this point. And then apparently, it's going to be on a 384-bit bus, or at least that's their guess. And they're guessing that it's also going to be GDDR6X. Although, honestly, depending on when this card comes out, it could be using GDDR7. But, either way, you're probably going to be looking at a 24GB GPU that's going to be very, very powerful. And, who knows, maybe they'll even slap 48GB on this if it's going to be like a 4090 or a Titan level type of GPU. But in any case, yeah, we're looking at a super powerful GPU here. And the reason why I'm talking about RTX 4000 is because according to a recent leak, we could actually see this architecture in the next Nintendo Switch, which is really, really bizarre. Now, this information comes from Cop87Kimi, where he responded to a videocards.com article talking about the new Nintendo Switch using DLSS and being able to hit 4K, which, honestly, that's not too surprising. And I think like about a year ago, I did talk about this. So if you want to hear more information on that, I'll probably link that video in the description below. But in any case, yeah, it looks like VideoCards made an article based off of these 4K DLSS rumors around the new Nintendo Switch. And then Cop87Kimi actually responded to that article over on Twitter by saying ADA. Now, to a lot of people, the letters ADA may not actually mean a whole lot, but he is actually referring to the ADA Lovelace architecture that we just talked about in the RTX 4000 series that should be coming out probably in the next 1 to 2 years here at some point. But in any case, he actually followed up by saying, I mean, the new Tegra Orin could contain 1 GPC of ADA, nothing else. So yeah, that's definitely interesting to hear that Cop87Kimi seems to believe that the next Lovelace architecture could be making its debut in the next Nintendo Switch, and that does lead me to believe that the Nintendo Switch is going to be very, very powerful because, as we just discussed, the RTX 4000 series The RTX 4000 series gets a release date, and AMD just released a faster version of the 6900 XT. Let's talk about it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Motherboard. Click the link in the description below. So the other day, NVIDIA had their GTC 2021 conference, and during the event, unfortunately, they did not reveal any new GeForce RTX video cards, such as, say, the RTX 3080 Ti that I know a lot of people have been waiting for. However, they did show off a lot of really cool technology, and there was one piece of information that they showed off that I thought was really, really important, and that was in regards to their next generation of GeForce RTX GPUs, or at least that's what it looks like to me. So taking a look at their chart here, we can see that they have what appears to be their GeForce GPUs listed, as well as their new CPUs and DPUs listed on a chart that goes all the way from 2020 to 2025. And for this video, I'm going to be focusing in on the GeForce GPUs, as that's probably what you guys are most excited for. So taking a look here, we can see the amperes listed as being released at some point in 2020. It does look like this chart was left a little bit intentionally vague so that you can't tell exactly when their next generation cards are going to be actually coming out, at least not an exact month here, but we can tell by looking at the ampere architecture that was released in the form of the RTX 3080 in September of 2020. So taking a look at that, and then you take a look at the Ampere Next architecture, which is listed at some point in 2022, we can kind of of assume that the RTX 4000 series is going to be the Ampere Next architecture, and it will likely debut in the RTX 4080. And taking a look at the chart, we can also assume that the RTX 4080 is going to have a similar release time as the RTX 30. At least just take a look at how things are structured here, though once again, since things are kind of vague, although it could be that it releases late 2022 sometime around September, likely once again that's probably what they're targeting. It is also possible that they could come out with the RTX 4080 a little bit sooner, and especially if AMD does put a lot of pressure on them. Let's say that AMD comes out with the RX 7000 series in like late 2021 or early 2022, then that definitely would push NVIDIA to come out with the RTX 4080 a little bit sooner. So we could potentially be seeing NVIDIA's RTX 4080 even as early 2022, and I definitely would like to see that. The sooner they can get new cards out, the better. I do like seeing big architectural jumps every 18 months or even sooner if possible. However, taking a look at this chart here, it does look like they're kind of leaning towards, every 2 years they're going to be trying to put out a video card, because then after Ampere Next, we see Ampere Next that's listed as being released sometime in 2024. So yeah, AMD's definitely going to have to put a lot of pressure on NVIDIA if they do want to get these cards, out to you sooner. And of course, if AMD gets their cards out sooner and those cards are really fast as well, those will definitely be some good GPUs to look out for as well. But either way, it does look like here we do have a general release time, or potentially even a release date for the RTX 4080. I would be expecting September 2022 or at least late 2022, just so you don't get your hopes up, because while it is possible that they could come out with it sooner, considering how all their RTX 30 series GPUs are just flying off the shelves, there's really no reason for them to rush it out at this point. So they have made these plans probably a long time in advance, and I would assume that what you're looking here on the chart is probably going to be pretty accurate. But now let's go ahead and talk about AMD's faster 6900 XT that they just released.
PC gaming is an absolute love. It's a passion, one that some folks in gaming take very seriously. But just like our favorite games that we break down a lot of times, PC building itself does have stuff that we hate sometimes. We scoured the internet to see what gaming PC builders complain about, and boy, do we have a list. So here are 10 things PC gamers hate about building PCs. Starting off with number 10, alright, let me explain the situation. So you've bought your parts, you've gone through the entirety of your build, you've run your cables, and you're ready to plug everything in and get down to business and start playing around on your shiny new PC. You're in the home stretch, and when you're plugging in all your stuff, you go to connect your mouse, and you hear the thud of the mouse on the desk, letting you know that your mouse cable is too short, and you need to either rearrange your whole situation extension on Amazon or something. That's the worst feeling. It's like such a buzzkill to that moment, and you screw up that last cable. Sure, it's not the end of the world, really, or anything, but it's just a type of minor inconvenience that can really drive you up a wall, especially in the home stretch of a PC build, and especially if that build has been frustrating throughout. It's kind of just like the shitty icing on the cake. Next at number 9, something we really hate about building PCs sometimes are the damn I/O shields. Now this is a big sometimes, because when things work great, it fits perfectly, it pops right in, boom, nobody has a problem. But if it doesn't, it totally freaking sucks. Installing I/O shields can often really be a huge pain in the ass, especially for cheaper cases. Like, the damn I/O shields sometimes just don't fit properly in them, and you have to remove the motherboard and mess around. The nicer the case you get, the less this is really a problem, but if you are in a cheaper build, sometimes you have to fiddle a little bit and cut back the retention prongs to really shove it in and get it in there, or maybe you're just one of the people that forget it to the last minute. Then you have no one else to blame but yourself. But it's just such an annoying little thing that might get lost under an instruction or a piece of paper or something that you have. And of course, sometimes the damn things are razor sharp and you can cut yourself while you're trying to force it back in, but then sometimes the motherboard isn't jiving with it right. Look, there's a lot of reasons. Some of you out there who have built it may have never run into a problem, but I've seen threads and threads of people complaining about these stupid tiny little things that don't really matter much in the grand scheme of things. But hey, I digress. Let's move on. Next at number 8, this is really more of a patience issue, but sometimes when building a PC, you have to order all your parts from different sellers and retailers because of stock issues, or maybe you're trying to get the best price. And then there's always that one part that comes like 2 weeks after all the rest of the parts. The worst is when it's like the motherboard and you can't even start building the PC. If it was the GPU you were waiting on, you could at least put together the rest of the PC and then slot it into GPU finally when it shows up, but no. For me, it's always the motherboard that always shows up 2 weeks late, forcing me to just kind of stare at all my expensive parts that are gathering dust because I can't do anything with them. Again, it's a first world problem. It's a really dumb complaint, but I feel like you guys have been there at least once. Next at number 7, this goes right along with waiting for parts to arrive. This might actually be worse because that's receiving parts that are dead on arrival, DOA. The worst part about any PC build is actually powering it on for the first time and seeing if it actually turns on, and when it doesn't, it's really defeating. Sometimes it's something as simple as not plugging something in all the way or putting something in the wrong spot, but sometimes, the worst thing is that a part is just shot, and it was shot before you even powered it on. You just got a bum part, which sucks because now you have to send that part back to wherever you bought it from and hope that they have another one to send you right away, and if they do, now you have to sit around and wait for that to show up to try it all over again. It's like one of the most longest drawn-out processes of trial and error ever, and it's always painful. But next at number 6, this is like a dumb hands issue, but I think we've all been here. After mounting and screwing in your motherboard and some other parts, dropping a tiny screw could be crushing, because it most likely will land underneath the motherboard, so it's wedged between the motherboard and the case, which means you have to backtrack all of your hard work to take the motherboard out to retrieve the screw you so stupidly dropped. Sometimes in builds you're lucky enough where you can get it out, but sometimes it falls deep enough into a crevice that you gotta take shit apart, and that's the worst. Nothing is the worst than the sound of a spare screw hitting the metal of the case. That's always when you know you fucked up. It's even worse. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've seen other people post about this, but then you get the screw, you put everything all back together, and then you drop it again, and you have to do it all over again. If it happens to you more than once in a row, I think you need to work on getting a better solution to solve that problem. There are solutions, but we'll save that for another video. Because at number 5, here's a big technology/life problem. Like, shopping around for parts and doing all the research for your build can take a while. Making sure you're shopping around and getting the best deals can take even longer. That said, it can be so frustrating and downright infuriating to get all your parts in, build your PC, and then like a week or two later see all of those parts drop in price or get a hot sale or something. And if you've got my luck, those sales always happen just outside of the acceptable window to get a price adjustment or a refund or the difference from a retailer, which always adds that little extra level of pain. Even worse than that is building your new PC and then shortly after seeing new iterations on hardware. Oh cool, you really just bought a sick new video card? Well guess what, idiot? Here's a brand new one that's even sicker. You're gonna want to buy that too. You can say on one hand, that's like your fault. You didn't do enough research of what's going on down the line before you bought that product, but it can still happen sometimes. It can still catch you by surprise. PC gaming is great, but sometimes stuff like this sucks. It's the same thing when you buy a phone. There's always going to be the next phone soon after, and you just gotta live with it. Coming down to number 4, as you probably know, connections and cable management is a really key part to any PC build. And while some are easier to get at than others, the process can be a real pain if you got big sausage fingers and you need to connect things like the little SATA cables to hard drives and the motherboard, as well as those tiny little case connections and fan power cables into the motherboard. Ugh! It can be really challenging even in a full-size build, but it can be even worse if you, say, really wanted a small and compact PC to play around with and take to different places, and you went with a micro ITX build and have really little room to work with. It's definitely not something that affects everyone, and some people use tools, but I'm sure I have at least a few sausage-fingered friends out there who feel my pain. Next at number 3, most PC parts feel pretty fragile, and when you handle them, you can't help but treat them as such and handle it like a baby. But in reality, most of these parts are way stronger than they look. I'm still convinced I can kill a man with a GTX 1080. But yeah, even with knowing that these parts are stronger than you think, when you're actually putting them together, it feels like you're dealing with glass or something. And plugging a GPU into a PCI slot is nerve-wracking because it actually feels like you're going to snap the motherboard in half sometimes. And the same goes for RAM, and also plugging in any power cables as well, like the main one. The fear of breaking a pin or snapping something in half is insane. Like Anxiety City, man, come on. This is the least fun aspect of building because all of your hard-earned money that you put into this thing, you could potentially screw it up in an instant. I'm probably stressing you out by talking about it right now. I'm sorry. Now at number 2, there are a few things that can take the wind out of your PC building sails more than realizing midway through a PC build that you're missing a part and need to stop and come back later. That's such a buzzkill. Maybe you forgot to buy SATA cables or a cooler, or you bought a radiator that just doesn't quite fit the case. I mean, I've had Newegg send me the wrong CPU that was for a completely different socket, and I just had to wait for days for a new one to arrive before I could finish my build. It's not always your fault, but regardless, it fucking sucks, and waiting around and losing out on that excitement is a little bit of a bummer. You get such a momentum going when you're building a PC that it's a bummer to have to regroup later and finish an already in progress build. Nothing feels better than in one sitting, building it perfectly and firing it up, and it works. Now you might say that more experienced builders will take a very good stock and inventory of everything they've ordered, and it will all fit, and they're not missing anything and everything works. But sometimes in reality, you're excited to build something and you don't check that quickly and you think everything goes together because you did the research on Google, and then bam, not so much. Basically what we're trying to say is that we hate when the thrill of a build is interrupted. Now finally, at number 1, probably the dumbest mistakes you can make is spending all your money on an awesome build, a nice monitor, a dope mouse and a keyboard, maybe 2 1080 Ti's, and then not leaving enough money in your budget to actually buy some games to play on the damn thing. It's something you realize just as you log into Steam for the first time, and then you realize, shit, I spent all my money. I can't afford to eat, and I can't afford to buy any games. Honestly, that's a heartbreaking feeling. I know for me, with my builds, if you want to buy a legit copy of Windows, that always kind of puts you over the edge. My budget personally, but it's just heartbreaking, especially because you're sitting there using multiple thousands of dollars worth of a machine, pretty much just as a glorified Twitter and Spotify machine until you get paid next week. I'm sure we've all been there at least once. Everybody's built a PC on a budget, and we feel your pain. But those are some things that we think PC gamers hate about building a PC. There are probably a lot more things to complain about, some more in-depth ones and some more lighthearted ones. We want to hear from you guys down in the comments. The world of building a PC is fun, exciting, and sometimes daring. But don't worry, hey, look, it's not as scary as it seems. We're here to help, and the best way to learn is really from the mistakes of others. We've taken personal experience here and what other builders are saying online to bring you 10 things you shouldn't do when building a PC. Now, just a quick disclaimer, we picked 10 no-nos, but there are always more issues out there. So make sure to do all of your research. Check your static electricity at the door, and let's get started off with number 10. We're going for the obvious first, but it needs to be known from the very start of your build, think long and hard about proper cable management. You don't want your PC to be a mess of tangled wires now, do you? Look, it's not just for aesthetic purposes either, this is practical stuff. I personally learned the hard way during one of my first builds. I had cables everywhere that not only acted as dust magnets, but when it came time for me to replace or upgrade a component, the mess I had left behind was the equivalent of me shooting myself in the foot. To change something, I basically had to unplug and rewire and connect a bunch of things. With zip ties, tubes, and just well-designed cases, there's a lot of things you can do in 2018 to hide almost all of your cables in a PC build. Don't leave your cables everywhere and screw yourself over later. That was 17-year-old me. Don't be like me. Now, next at number 9, we got to acknowledge heat sinks and how they can be crooked sometimes. Look, sometimes things just don't line up. I mean, sure, if you got a closed system liquid cooler from the likes of Corsair or NZXT, or if you're brave enough to build your own, getting a nice and perfectly aligned cooler is easy. You just bolt it on. Air cooling setups tend to be a bit more finicky though, as you'll inevitably need to bracket it down to the board while it's sitting on the CPU with some thermal paste. This leaves room for it to budge and shift slightly while tightening it down, and if you're unlucky enough, like me sometimes, you get a tower cooler that is just a few degrees off from being perfectly aligned. While I know this may not be a thing to bother most people, I know it bugs the crap out of us here, and I'm sure there are others who are out there who are striving for the perfect PC build that feel the same way, and we're really just trying to make a bigger point here in terms of screwing things down and lining things up. Make sure you do it right. With certain components and certain attachments, if you don't like the way it looks, it is worth taking the time to go back, redoing it, and getting it just right. Of course, it also needs to be said that by going back and redoing things, you need to be extra careful. Go easy on screws, you don't want to strip them, and basically you just don't want to rush any aspect of the build, and I think a crooked heatsink is the perfect way to point out that example. Now, down to number 8, let's talk about case mistakes. Spending money on a giant case when you don't really need it is something I see happen often, and it really bothers me. Sure, look, you do you. You have the freedom to get whatever case you want, and having one that's too big doesn't really hurt anything technically, but just think, you might have spent an extra $150 on that bigger, awesome case, yet you don't even have plans to ever add a water cool system or extra drives or anything. Instead, you could have gotten a more reasonable size case and put that extra cash, maybe that extra 100 or anything. Instead, you could have gotten a more reasonable size case and put that extra cash, maybe that extra 100 or 150 bucks or something, to something more useful, you know? Some will even argue you just shouldn't spend much money on a case at all. We see that in a lot of build threads. Buying for looks doesn't necessarily mean much when you could especially be putting it towards more computer power, which is the bottom line. On the flip side though, some people get different cases for different needs like size, portability, work, VR, etc. So it's really up to you and your needs. But just know that cases are where your budget can see the most ebb and flow. So don't forget that during the process. Now next at number 7 in our research, we saw a lot of people making this mistake. Don't screw up the installation of the motherboard stand-ups. Or even more accurate, don't just skip them altogether or forget them. For the safety of your build, the motherboard needs to be raised off of the surface of your case. And to do that, you just typically install the little riser screws anywhere, usually from like 4 to 12 of them, into a case so you can place the motherboard on top, just like so. Forgetting them or thinking you can skip them is a first-time build rookie mistake. Along with that, just install them right. Make sure they're compatible with your case and screw in properly. Don't strip any screws, and definitely make sure they line up with the notches in your board. You don't want a crooked or weird motherboard. That could cause problems down the line. Next at number 6, this is more of a matter of taste, but a lot of people feel passionate about this stuff. Be careful with LEDs. Choose carefully and do it right so you don't have a build that looks like a child's toy. Some folks on here and other places will argue to not bother with LEDs at all, but like I've been saying with this whole list, you do you. You want to light it up? Go ahead, we're not going to tell you what to do, but if you are looking for advice, I always think LED fans look kind of funny. I don't want to say cheap, but sorta. Take the time to understand the ins and outs of your specific case and do hidden LED strips or subtle lighting instead, because that stuff can make your case look cool and fancier. Again, this point is really just personal taste. Just don't worry about LEDs. It's not going to matter much when you're playing The Witcher 3 on Ultra anyway. Don't sweat the small stuff. Now next at number 5, it wouldn't be a PC video if we didn't talk about thermal paste. Applying this stuff is an integral part of the PC building process, and we know it can be a real source of anxiety for a lot of newcomers. Apply way too little and your PC will just overheat and shut off, or your CPU can burn out depending on what the build is. On the flip side, if you apply too much paste, it can seep out from under the cooler onto the motherboard itself, and not only look gross, it can potentially cause shorts in the system and just mess up your whole situation. This can be made more complicated by choosing an unfamiliar compound that is too liquidy and just gets all over the place when you clamp down your cooler, or a thicker compound that you aren't quite sure how well it'll spread out. It's a small thing that can make things get bad real fast, and everyone will tell you slightly different things, so it's a matter of both doing your research and also just being comfortable with the process. I always say the best knowledge you can have going into applying thermal paste and stuff like that is just confidence. Next at number 4, all right, look, airflow is super important. Now, we're not gonna get into the minutia of different types of airflow strategies and pressure systems and all that. That's for a whole nother video. But we will reiterate that, for God's sakes, just make sure you know the push-pull configuration on your fans and install them properly the first time. There are a few things worse than installing your fans backwards and keeping all that hot air inside the case and overheating all your fresh new components. So definitely read the back of the box, make sure the cable's plugged in right, and make sure it's installed in the right direction. And while we're on the subject of component temperatures, check your temperatures after you finish your build and make sure everything is optimal. It's best to know if you need more fans or to reapply thermal paste at the start than when you're in the middle of a gaming binge weeks later and things get too hot. It can still happen, but we just see a lot of people make the mistake of not actually giving their PC a proper checkup once it's built. Now at number 3, this one might sound obvious, but if you've done it, you probably get it. It's not pushing your power cables all the way in. We get it. You just spent a ton of money on all the components for your new PC, and you're trying to be gentle and not break anything. After all, electronics tend to be fragile a lot of times. PC building isn't really a place for those sentiments though. You gotta make sure everything is pushed into place until it clicks in securely, and power cables are no exception. And a lot of people are missing the landing on that one. These things require a lot of pressure at times, so don't get nervous. Sure, it can sometimes feel like you're about to bend or break the damn motherboard with how hard you need to press to get the connectors to click into place, but not securing such important connections will just lead to a headache down the line. This also goes for power connections on hard drives and video cards as well, even though the main power cable is the hardest one. You just gotta make sure all that stuff is in there until it usually clicks. This is one of the main issues when a new builder fires up their PC for the first time and nothing happens. Check your connections, maybe you were playing it too safe. Just keep it in mind. Now down to number 2, this is the thing a lot of first-time builders really get nervous about. You do get used to it, but I still hold my breath while doing it. It's the placement of the CPU to the motherboard, the whole build. Getting that sucker directly on the socket requires one slow, straight, and not shaky placement downwards. It's gotta be deliberate. Do not push hard on it or reshift it after it's in place. Remember, with most CPUs, to follow that little corner triangle to show which way you are placing it, whether it's AMD or Intel, the pins on the CPU are sensitive little boys, and you can bend them and screw them up really easily. So just be slow and careful, and like I said, deliberate on this part. Some folks can fix bent pins after a mistake, but if you're not a handy, experienced person, it might be harder. Now, this might not sound like a big deal to some. You need to be mindful of all this because the CPU is obviously one of the more expensive parts to the build, and you don't want to screw it up after one little mistake with your awkward, dumb hands. And down to number 1, one of the biggest mistakes that first-time PC builders can make is when it comes to shopping. It's not uncommon to try and get the most for your money, when you're shopping for parts. Compromising on brands and tiers of products is a fact of life for most PC builders. However, you need to know when and where to do it. A lot of people spend way too much money on more low-impact parts and then skimp on something like the CPU or the graphics card. If you're building a high-end PC, maybe consider spending more than $40 on a power supply. It really is a, you get what you pay for type of situation for a lot of components. Not all, but most. A case is a case. Drives from major manufacturers are more or less on par with each other these days for most people's gaming needs. But think, do you really need that $700 ROG Rampage 6 Extreme motherboard? Are you going to use all of the capabilities offered to you by it? Or would you be better served with a more reasonable motherboard and upping that Core i5 to an i7 and adding some life to your rig with a little more computing power? Ultimately, look, we're not your dad and it's your money to spend how you see fit, but maybe spend a bit more on the super important parts that will be more noticeable in your day-to-day PC usage. We talked about it earlier with LEDs, we talked about it with the size of a case. Really, the aspect of buying the right parts and all the shopping in that is the most research and the biggest hurdle to get over as a first-time PC builder, so make sure you take your time and do it all right. But those are 10 things we think you shouldn't do when building a PC for the first time. Now there are many more things out there, so we definitely want to hear from